It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Check out our merch store on thefinside.threadless.com. Paul and I are here for all of your Miami Dolphins news and your fix here throughout the summer months. We're breaking down the wide receiver and tight end unit today. Paul, not a lot of depth on this Dolphins roster, and we don't expect there to be in 2019 as we continue to find what are those treasures throughout the year. But wide receiver and tight end does appear to be two of those positions that have a lot more depth than the others.
Wide receiver to me more so than tight end. Tight end has a lot of bodies, but tight end has a lot more question marks to me than the wide receiver position does. I mean, obviously, we already talked about the running back position, fairly deep there. Wide receiver position, I mean, it's going to be very hard for somebody to crack that top five that's not already there. The tight end position, it's kind of a free-for-all to me. I mean, we've got a lot of question marks. Gesicki's in his second year with kind of a rough-ish start. And then there's a whole lot of question marks behind him. Does O'Leary stick? Are they going to keep three and a fullback? Are they going to, move people around? What are they going to do? And are they going to go after somebody that shakes loose from another team? So tight end seems to have more question marks, even though it felt like Miami was signing a tight end every 2 days at the start of free agency.
Yeah, wide receiver definitely has more depth than the tight end spot in terms of numbers. The big difference being that wide receiver, you can put 3 or 4 guys on the field at the same time, sometimes up to 5, where at tight end, usually you're only going to put 1, maybe 2 out there at that time. So we'll get to the tight end spot in just a minute. But before we do, Paul and I, as we continue to go through these positional breakdowns, we're going to take a look at who would we keep right now in the summer, in May and June, on that 53-man roster. So far at the quarterback and running back spot, we both have Josh Rosen and Ryan Fitzpatrick at the quarterback position. And at running back, we both have Kenyon Drake, Kalen Ballage, Chandler Cox at that spot. Paul has Myles Gaskin making the 53-man roster. I actually don't. I have them going with 3 running backs, including Chandler Cox so far. So any changes you want to make to that right now, Paul?
No, for that I'm pretty good at the moment. I still stand by what I said before.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to stick with what I said before. I think eventually the Dolphins will sign a third running back, but given with what's on the team, that's what we're going with. So I'll stick with the quarterbacks and running backs that I have so far. Let's take a look at the wide receiver position. I've always believed that a wide receiver unit can't make a bad quarterback a good quarterback. The quarterback himself has to do that, but a wide receiver unit can make a good quarterback a great quarterback, or an average quarterback a good quarterback. And I think when you take a look here at the wide receiver unit, the Dolphins don't necessarily have a number 1 receiver. Heck, they may not even have a number 2 receiver on their team, but they do have 4 players who should make this 53-man roster and are good at a lot of different things. You've got Kenny Stills, Albert Wilson, Devante Parker, Hakeem Grant. What the pecking order is throughout the year still remains to be seen and should be decided here throughout the summer. So, Paul, Albert Wilson, Kenny Stills appear to be the top 2 guys. Kenny Stills had a pretty rough 2018 season, but who can blame him? I mean, he started out the year actually 4 catches, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns in the first 2 games against the Titans. After that, he had, I think, 33 catches, 450 yards, 4 touchdowns when you take out that first game. So struggled, but, I don't really blame him a whole lot when you look at his quarterback situation the last 2 years with Ryan Tannehill, Brock Osweiler, Jay Cutler, and Matt Moore.
Yeah, I mean, that Osweiler stretch was pretty brutal to me as far as the wide receivers go. And, you mentioned that they don't have a number 1 receiver. It's true that they don't have a true, by definition, alpha. Devante Parker's always had the promise to be one, can't seem to put it all together. And despite what at least one of our listeners think, I'm sorry, Devante Parker causes interceptions thus far in his career. I hope he proves me wrong this season. But anytime a wide receiver makes half-ass efforts at batting the ball up in the air or not making a play on the ball when you're the tallest damn guy with all the physical attributes to go up and get it, and you let a shorter player who doesn't have as much ups as you do go up and get it instead, to me, yeah, that's a wide receiver that causes a lot of interceptions. But, they've got a lot of special there. And then Preston Williams as well has been showing it up in camp, much like a few have in the past few years. Hopefully he catches on.
Yeah. So you got Kenny Stills and Albert Wilson really as the top two right now in the pecking order. Albert Wilson last year, I was not a big fan of the signing, but that's changed a little bit. And unfortunately, he tore his Achilles in the second quarter of the seventh game against the Detroit Lions. Up to that point, Albert Wilson had 26 catches for 406 yards and 5 total touchdowns. If you take that over a 16-game season, he has 64 catches for over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. So he certainly broke a lot of big plays. Whether or not he's good at getting off the line of scrimmage and getting into routes remains to be seen. I don't think he really has that ability. But what he can do is he gets open with his intelligence. He catches the ball, and he's able to break a tackle and take it the distance. We saw it 3 different times in the first 6.5 games for the Dolphins last year. Going back to Devante Parker, my big thing with him is the hope that he's going to be used differently this year. And I'm not saying that the problems that happened over the last few years were because he wasn't used correctly. I'm not going to go down that route because I don't think that's the case. Say what you want about Gase, but I don't think that's the case. It was a lack of effort. It's been injuries. It's been consistency. It's been a lot of things with Devante Parker. But what I am encouraged by, Paul, is that if Brian Flores thought enough of him to bring him back, and Brian Flores and Chris Greer thought enough of him to bring him back onto this roster, then you have to think that they had a plan for him. And I hope that plan isn't to make him the number one all-around receiver, either play to your potential or get off the field. I want to see this guy play 20, 25 snaps, get down the field, and create some mismatch problems, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, Parker's a weird case. He's a guy that, when Miami had him at points where he had to prove it to get playing time again, he suddenly busted out and showed up like he was an alpha receiver. And as soon as he had the role or had his spot again and moved back up the depth chart, he kind of stopped. So I feel like with Parker, he's one of those weird guys that if you keep bringing him in as more of a reliever at wide receiver, he's going to do all those things that make everybody question why he's not the starter. But maybe that's the way you need to deploy him. Instead of, just giving him the starting role, you bring him in, as the game wears on and have him be a rotating guy, and he's going to put up special plays and special numbers, and it's going to be tempting to throw him into that starter role again, but it might be a situation where he just needs to continue feeling like he has to prove it on every single play.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, nobody expected him back this year, and going back to what you said last year with Devante Parker, he only played one game up until that Texans Thursday night football game, and then he gets on the field, catches 6 passes for 134 yards, and people started thinking maybe he's going to start breaking out here toward the end of the year. After that, in the final games, 8 yards, 43 yards, 10 yards, 43 yards, 18, 0, 13, 0. So finally he had the light shined on him, and, he stepped on his own dick once again. So I'm hoping that Devante Parker is able to be that 20 to 25 snap type of guy, make those mismatch problems down the field. Somebody who always makes the most of their opportunities is Hakeem Grant. It'll be interesting to see if he's the third receiver, the fourth receiver. He also went on injured reserve in Week 10. But this is somebody, too, that I think you got to play out there on the boundary instead of the slot, because when he's out there on the boundary, that it seems to be where he's most comfortable. And he may not be that type of guy at 5'6", who you want to be throwing passes to over the middle.
You know what? I don't have a problem with throwing Hakeem Grant passes anywhere. I think those quick slants, he's going to make something special happen and make people miss. He is just fun to watch when he's got the ball in his hands, when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. I mean, there's a couple of plays last year that you look back and the moves that he put on a defensive back just made the back look stupid. We're not talking about like, oops, let me go this way, let me go that way. We're talking about, you want to talk about stepped on their dick. Watch a few of the defensive backs when Hakeem throws a move on them. It is crazy to me to watch. And the sheer speed and mismatches they can create with packages with him and Albert Wilson moving all over the field are just special. And they're plays that we will need with a team that is lacking some depth in other areas to keep defenses back on their heels and to get a few things done. So Hakeem Grant and Albert Wilson are two players that I don't want to see broken up at all.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Raiders game last year when the Dolphins struggled on offense throughout the game, and then you get into the fourth quarter, you have Grant and you have Wilson on the field, and they score 24 points in the fourth quarter, beat the Raiders, go to 3-0. Then the following week against New England, you don't see that anymore. And that's what I hope is the difference between O'Shea and Adam Gase this year, is that if something is working, keep doing it until the defense stops you, and then you can move on to something else. So I'm hoping that's going to happen. But bottom line is, with these top four receivers, there's a lot of youth. All these guys are 27 years old and younger. So there's a lot of speed, a lot of diversity in their skill set. So it should make for an interesting wide receiver room. But once we get past that, Paul, the fifth receiver spot is looking like it's going to go to Preston Williams at this time, the undrafted free agent out of Colorado State. I know it's just OTAs, but he's going to go up against a couple of guys in camp: Bryce Butler, Isaiah Ford, Trenton Irwin, and Reese Horn. The Dolphins are only keeping 9 wide receivers here in camp. I like that because it gives them a lot more looks and gives them more of an opportunity to make the team. But how do you see the rest of this roster shaping up at wide receiver?
I think Preston gets a 5 spot, but then I look at Isaiah Ford and Bryce Butler, and Miami is not a lock to keep 6 guys. I mean, Ford's a guy that any of our listeners know I've been a fan of. Bryce Butler seemed to come on and have chemistry with Tannehill last year. But again, that's a whole different regime, whole different scheme. He's got a lot to prove yet again to even have a chance at making the roster for a position that may or may not exist at this point in time. But yeah, Preston Williams far and away the front runner based on how he's not as physically gifted as Devante Parker, but doing all of the things in OTAs that Devante Parker should be.
Preston Williams last year at Colorado State, 96 catches, 1,345 yards, 14 touchdowns. Mel Kiper was talking about him as a second-round pick before he had his very bad pro day, in addition to having off-the-field problems too. But he definitely doesn't lack confidence, and he definitely doesn't lack physical tools either. The big difference is that Preston Williams is probably not somebody who can play special teams, and that's going to be taken into account. It would be a shame to me if Bryce Butler ended up making the team as the 5th receiver, because that will have meant that Preston Williams and Isaiah Ford did not step up enough to warrant that 5th wide receiver position. I also see them keeping 5 wide receivers, with Preston Williams being that 5th guy. And I look on game day for the Dolphins to deploy more of the cornerbacks like Cornell Armstrong and Jalen Davis to special teams work. The rest of the field here, so we've gone through these 5 guys. Bryce Butler, again, would be a huge disappointment if he made the team as the 5th receiver. He only caught 6 passes last year in 117 snaps. And so in 117 snaps, Paul, 6 catches and 3 penalties. So this guy may be a candidate for the Coke bus before the season even begins.
Yeah, I'm down for that. I think we can throw him right on the Coke bus right now, and yeah, it's just disgusting to me.
So Isaiah Ford, this seems to be his last opportunity because, this is a player we were both high on when he came out of Virginia Tech. Had an injury at the end of the season, fell to the 7th round. The Dolphins were lucky enough to get him there. Then goes on injured reserve again in 2017 in his rookie year. 2018, he bounces back and forth, gets onto the active roster, dresses for a game. But he also is a guy who can't play special teams either. I'm hoping, though, that he is going to make the team as a sixth receiver in this kind of year. Because if you look at the rest of the roster, if the Dolphins decide to go away from Devante Parker next year or go away from Kenny Stills or Albert Wilson or Hakeem Grant in 2 years, then Ford may have the opportunity to step up. Do you think the Dolphins are going to be that patient with him, though?
There's a chance. I mean, he's got to show the skills that made him so dangerous at Virginia Tech. I mean, coming off the injuries that he's had, he needs to have a very, very good camp. But again, I love the talent evaluators that we have in the staff now, that I think we're going to see a lot less misses like the Chris Hogans of the world with the coaching staff, with the front office, with Chris Greer, with McKenzie, you look at some of these guys and the talent evaluators we have on this staff, and that's where it's going to be critical for Isaiah Ford to have his big camp, show the things he can do. And if so, I think Miami's got a chance at showing that patience, but some of it will come down to, the next position we're going to talk about, which is the tight ends. I mean, are they going to keep 3 tight ends? Are they going to keep 4 tight ends? And in which way are they going to deploy that room? And that's going to be very, very critical here, because don't forget, you look at next season, Miami's got a plethora of draft picks and cap space. So hanging on as the bottom end wide receiver is not a comfy place that anyone should be in going into next season when Miami's got the ammunition to go after whatever they want to.
Well said. And the 8th and 9th receivers in camp here, Trenton Irwin, the rookie out of Stanford, caught 60 passes last year, did have a grade 3 MCL tear. Looks a little Brian Hartline-ish, but he's going to have an uphill battle to make this roster. The last guy, Reese Horn, played for Memphis in the AAF. And believe it or not, he was actually 4th in the AAF in receiving yards, even catching passes from Christian Hackenberg. Chris Kaufman put up a nice video on YouTube with Reese Horn on there. And the first 2 passes that you see in that video, you'll see Christian Hackenberg just airmailing the ball to Reese Horn. So very unlikely he makes the final roster either. So we've got those 5 guys in place. I'm still going back and forth with Isaiah Ford, but I'm going to leave him off the roster right now because he just doesn't have that special teams ability. So at tight end, Paul, the Dolphins signed Dwayne Allen in the offseason. I wasn't a big fan of this signing at first because when you look at him, he, for the Patriots last year, played 250-something snaps, just caught 3 passes for 29 yards. And I've always had this theory that if you're going to play a tight end that can only block, then why don't you just play a 6th offensive tackle? And that's kind of what Dwayne Allen is. But one thing I do like about this signing in Allen is it seems like O'Shea and Flores are going to use, or at least have plans to use, Mike Gesicki the way that he should be used, which is as a receiving tight end, not a blocker.
Yeah, I wasn't enamored with the Dwayne Allen signing. I mean, if you gave me Dwayne Allen, several years ago, the one that was playing for the Colts before all the injuries, I would have been a lot more down for it because he was a lot more complete tight end before he had all the issues. But you know what? Maybe he helps Gesicki learn how to block. Maybe he turns out to be a huge help for Durham Smythe, who I think people are writing off a little too early here. And the one guy that's a little bit of a dark horse for me still is Nick O'Leary. He was such a feel-good story, blue-collar type. That seems like the type of player that Brian Flores would absolutely be enamored with. And he could be that guy that challenges Chandler Cox for the fullback role as well, because he's just so varied in his skill set.
That's just it for me with Nick O'Leary is I see him challenging Chandler Cox for one roster spot because O'Leary is a good blocker in his role as an H-back in previous seasons, but he's not that on-the-line tight end that Dwayne Allen or Durham Smythe are. That's why I see him not making the roster. Two other players that I don't see making the roster, either at tight end to round out the room, is Clive Wolford, the former Miami Hurricanes, third-round pick of the Raiders in 2015. Actually had a very good start to his career, 59 catches in 2015 and 2016 playing with Derek Carr up there, but has struggled a lot lately. He had an ATV accident a couple of years ago, and he spent some time with the Jets and the Colts, but he's been slipping in and out of rosters since then. I don't see him making the roster. And the Dolphins undrafted free agent Chris Myrick from Temple, 6'5", 250, caught 14 passes for 146 yards last year with Temple in his biggest season. Not somebody I see making the roster either. Paul, so I've got three guys that we've talked about making it: Dwayne Allen, Mike Gesicki, and Durham Smythe. I've got them cutting Nick O'Leary, Clive Wolford, and Chris Myrick. How does the tight end roster breakdown go for you?
I think we're actually in the same school of thought here. I mean, I've got them keeping the same three guys, and like we both said, it's Chandler Cox is Nick O'Leary's worst enemy going into training camp. So if they end up keeping O'Leary, it's at the expense of Chandler Cox. But right now, I don't have them doing so, even though I really like the kid, and I think Flores will too.
Absolutely. So we've got some of the roster is starting to shape up here as we continue these positional breakdowns throughout the summer. Hope this fed your Miami Dolphins fix, our Dolphins fans, and we appreciate the following and the comments there on YouTube. Please continue to do that. We love the feedback. You can follow Paul and I on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Check out our merch store on the FinSide.threadless.com. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the FinSide. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side